Welcome to Altar of the Demo Gods. If you're wondering what advice from two experienced sales engineers sounds like, it's a little like this.
Welcome back to Altar of the Demo Gods. My name is Keith Wilson. I am joined by my co-host, John Morton. John, how you doing?
I am, 2 fingers deep in whiskey, so pretty good right now, Keith.
2 fingers deep in whiskey.
It's a new day.
Speaking of enjoying being 2 fingers deep, we also have our guest back again this week is Eric Mueller. Eric, how are you?
I was going to say that's got to be one of the more impressive segues I've ever heard in my life. Keith, thank you so much.
I always try to make a good segue. It really is somewhat of an art form that I have not mastered, but I'd like to someday.
2 fingers deep and no convictions. We're all good. All right.
Yeah, it's the setup in the tee. That's why we're a good team, Keith, right? Like, I set them up with the 2 fingers and you slam them in.
That's right. That's right. Okay. you set him up. All right. Anyway, last week, we talked about storytelling. And we emphasized how storytelling applies to being a sales engineer. We talked about how it's hooked in evolutionarily to you. John, you brought up something that I liked called the story sandwich. Remind our listeners what that is.
Story sandwich, right? You got to have that nice, sharp intro and that beautifully rounded outro, very quick, concise, and beautiful. And then all the filler in between is the story you're trying to sell, and you can play that by ear, but it's the story sandwich. Good intro, good outro.
Yeah, we talked about setting hooks. Eric, we talked a little bit about how social engineering applies. The social engineering principle of ego suppression applies. Talk to us a little bit more about ego suppression and how this is a warning to those who are using storytelling as part of their presentation, their pitch.
Yeah, certainly. So, for all you alphas or alpha geeks that move their way into sales engineering, it's about resisting that impulse that says you have to share the best story in the room. And sometimes it's best to sit back and let your audience, have the spotlight.
Yeah. Yeah, so some really interesting conversations. So if you didn't listen to last week's episode, first of all, you should be subscribed to us. We're on everywhere that you can get podcasts. We're also on YouTube. We're even on YouTube podcasts now. But we're also on, we upload these videos to YouTube as well. So subscribe to that so that you know what we're talking about. But if you didn't listen to last week's episode and storytelling is interesting to you, or you'd like to see how it applies to you as a sales engineer, go back and listen to that week's episode. That was episode 12, I believe. In this episode, I want to talk about understanding customer use cases and aligning the product to those use cases. As sales engineers, we have to do this in a couple different ways. We have to do this up front. In meetings with customers, we're doing a technical pitch and a demo, but we also have to do this on the back end with product development and the product management team, where we act as the middlemen between prospective customers and existing customers, and providing use cases and feedback and how the product should align to customers. So let's start with understanding what a customer use case is. Eric, I want to start with you. I want to hear what your explanation of, or your definition of, as simple as we can. Explain it to me like I'm 5. What is a use case?
It's evolved over time, but ultimately what the use case is the story explaining the challenge that the customer has in a way that can be mapped to the product and or service that you're providing. So it's about saying, okay, here's what I'm trying to do. I'm really trying to solve this challenge. And there's a story to be set around that and mapping those two together.
Kind of like you just did with this week's episode, last week's episode.
Kind of. Something to be said for my own segues.
So, John.
Okay.
John, what do you think of Eric's description? Is that accurate? Anything we should add to it?
I like Eric's description, as always. There's always more
Yeah.
I'd like to add to it.
Yeah.
Practicing my own level of hubris, you know?
So, Eric, when you're sitting down with, when you're having that first customer meeting, and we're not talking about you pitching them anything, but you're having a discovery conversation with them, what are some of the methods you use to try and understand what their use cases are, especially if they don't even know what their own use cases are?
Well, I think of use case really as the ultimate level of tailoring what you're trying to provide, right? So to get there, you need to find out what are the problems you're trying to solve, and trying to have an open and honest discussion around what are the problems you're trying to solve, and how do we get in. And then you're racking your brain trying to figure, all right, here's what I'm selling. How can I describe what I'm selling in a way that helps map to the problems they're trying to solve? In between there is the story of that use case. The use case can be something as simple as, I don't have a way to detect this. That could be a very simple type of use case. And you might have something that says, well, if we write a rule this way, it's going to detect that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That would be a very basic level use case. Others can be a lot more involved with regards to business processes. And
I would say you shouldn't leave a discovery conversation just sitting at that. You should understand, well, why do you want that?
Oh yeah,
right?
no, that's
Yeah.
I'm talking. I'm still talking. Yeah, you got a ways to go. I'm talking very early in.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it's good discovery, right? So in good discovery, I break it down into two types of questions. I'm going to tell this very long-winded story, not right now, but over the course of this entire podcast. It's going to be beautiful, and I'm good at it. So think about it, open-ended questions. Ted, this is a great way to figure out why someone's there. Early discovery. Tell me about, explain to me, or describe for me, as well as closed-ended questions. Do you have this much money? Is this something that you need today? Yes or no, right? So those long-winded questions can help you get to what they're there for. And then those closed-ended questions can help you kind of square around what you're selling. And I'll leave it with this. Everybody always asks me, and this is the beginning of my story, so John, you sell Ferraris? What's that like?
Okay. So you've set the hook.
Set the hook, baby.
You are approved for sentence 2. So, as part of discovery and asking these questions, we have to do something that's very difficult. And I know because I have to do it on this podcast. And, well, we all have to do it on this podcast. It's called active listening. And that's like truly paying attention to what somebody is saying. Focusing all of your energy only on what they're saying and not what you're going to say next.
You're
trying to gather.
Yeah.
Yeah. My job sucks.
Too easy. Sorry.
100%. And active listening is extremely difficult. So I guess it depends on what brought them around first, too, right? So there's two ways to look at it. One, did we reach out to this person and engage with them, maybe like a cold call, right? That's different than did they come to us and we're trying to figure out what they want. So, back to my point about, so John, you sell Ferraris. Let's just imagine I own a Ferrari dealership and I get somebody who comes into my lot. I automatically know they have some sort of interest in what I'm pitching. I didn't have to do anything to engage with them. And I think what I'm trying to do immediately is figure out what they want, right? And to your point of use cases, number one, can I qualify this person quickly as to whether or not they're in need of a Ferrari? And then number two, can I help build a story around why the Ferrari is right for them? Does that kind of make sense about how I kind of approach a use case? Is that first and foremost gate check of, are you even the right person? Is this even the right, if you're here shopping for a minivan, or you're not even in the business of buying a car, you just think my Ferrari's cool, I need to know straight away. Now, that's a little cruel. I know I'm like that, but, I'd rather, before I try to tell you this awesome story about how Matthew McConaughey test drove this Ferrari yesterday, I want to know if you're even what you're here for, right? Tell me about what brought you in today, right? Are you in the need for a car? Those are two examples of an open-ended question. Tell me about what you're doing here. And then number two, are you looking for a car? Yes or no? So that's kind of how I approach no matter what it is, but building the use case is that discovery criteria.
So what are you doing to get the neurons firing? Because this is the on the spot SE thinking now, right? As you're asking these discovery questions, we got to get the neurons firing to link these up to actual use cases.
You're right.
How are you guys doing that? And sometimes on the fly, not always, because usually I like to think of discovery as that's more about the customer talking than me talking. So I've got, a line of questioning maybe already written out, but for the most part, I'm just going to ask some open-ended questions and try and let them talk as much as I can.
Yeah.
But hopefully I can walk away from that meeting and prepare by aligning what they've told me to my product. So what do you guys have a method for doing that, or any sort of process for doing that?
I think part of it starts with reading the room. So, to John's point about, am I talking to the right person? Is the person standing behind him daddy? Is that the one with the checkbook? Are you empowered to make the financial decision here that we're talking about? Are you the one that's, experiencing whatever challenge it is that a new Ferrari is going to solve for you? Who else did you bring to the room? Who else are you going to need to bring to the room to have the conversation? Maybe creditors or anybody else. I mean, there's a lot of stuff in there with regards to, and that all just fits into just basic qualifying. Are we wasting our time here?
Let's say we've gotten past the qualification part. Now we're getting ready we're prepping to tell them our story.
Yes,
and we need to do that by aligning these use cases.
I think a good example to set it up for you, Eric, is like, let's just go with it, right? Let's go with my Ferrari idea. One of the questions I always like to ask, that it sounds rude up front, but it's honest. Have you ever bought in a car before? Yes. Okay. Do you already own a sports car? Yes. Now my neurons are firing. Now I'm like, okay, now maybe I can tell them something that associates to what they want. Or, are you in this form of cybersecurity? Have you bought in software before? All the answers are yes. If I feel confident in that, what do you think the next step is to help to quantify maybe some success criteria or use cases?
I'd say, let's talk about business requirements. Are we talking about, people that we're trying to answer to? We talk about compliances. Do we have anybody else that we're looking to answer to? What kind of reporting do you have to your senior executive team? And what kind of questions are they asking of you? Let's make sure that we're making your life easier the whole way down the road. Because sometimes those things are bigger questions that they might not be thinking about, but you can be in a situation to be able to. And I'll be honest, it's a little more challenging thinking that way, selling services the way they sell now, as opposed to when I was slinging product. Product can be a lot more tangible when you get there. Services, it's a little more interesting when you're getting into those discussions. So I've had to kind of adjust my thinking a little bit to be able to get there.
I think so. You tell me if I'm right or wrong here, but I think that, how before last episode we didn't do it, Keith, but this one I will. Here's $1 million point. I promise you this is worth $1 million. We've known people that made $1 million on a point like this. I don't care if it's services or software or a car. I like to find two sorts of people that help me build the use case of what they want. They're either one, they've been bitten. They have an immediate pain or immediate problem that they have to solve. That's number one. Number two is what I like to call kind of a ladder climber. They have some personal gain or interest where making an investment in whatever I sell is going to personally make them position better. Those two are two key indicators to me. If it's a science experiment for compliance,
no,
not for me. Not going to work. But if they're saying, hey, I have this pain, I have this audit finding, or I have this pain, there's this girl who wants to date me and I got $100,000 right now, I'm going to take that money. No. Right.
But that said, compliance isn't always going to be, a science experiment. You just take a look at, acronyms failing me at the moment. Government purchasing contracts. What's the one I'm thinking of?
OS.
OSS. There's a compliance out there right now that basically says you need to have all these bars checked off. Otherwise, you can't renew government contracts. It's meant for reducing risk compliance. And
so that actually,
I met a couple of people that got bitten by that one.
So that goes to understanding
Yep,
the use
CMMC.
case specifically. What was that?
CMMC.
CMMC. But that, I think that's to your point, Keith, right? When we're talking about a use case, that's easy. That's a great layup, right? That's like, hey, are you trying to satisfy CMMC? Because this is the exact way this tool will solve it. This is the exact use case that I'm going to solve for you. That's a great way to key in to understand your target audience and satisfy that requirement. I think that's understanding what you're selling and who you're selling to. Again, back to that point,
Reading the
teeing
room.
that up. Reading the room. What do they want?
So to summarize, what I'm hearing is ask questions around pain, right? Because you both described asking, if we're simplifying, asking questions around pain.
That's my favorite, man.
Yeah, if you were to go back to our old framework, it's excuse me,
MedPick.
Identify pain. Pain is my favorite customer, always.
See, this is two things that we take away from Eric. One, he hasn't watched our previous 2 shows that are available at the moment, but that's okay.
Do you disagree? Do you disagree with that, John?
No, we agree. The training that you had is so instilled in you that deep in the roots of that brain, you still dug it up.
Force management and MedPick, baby. Yeah.
Oh man, it matters though. It's effective.
Yeah, I think we talked a little bit about Medic, which is similar to MedPick. We talked about Medic in episode 5, I think, which, as of this recording, hasn't been released yet.
So
no, and Medic ignores the paper process P, which is ridiculously important to me because I've gotten bitten by that one.
Being in services, I could see that, but no, just reflection that even bringing Eric on. We didn't prep him per se. We didn't coach him. You can't. It works. It works.
Well, understanding customer use cases and pitching based on the use cases also helps to make sure that they stay a customer, right? Getting a customer is so much more expensive than it is to maintain a customer. So when you get a customer, you want to make sure, especially if you're a shareholder in the company or have options in the company, some sort of stake in the company, where you might not be able to see that customer, you personally may not get residuals off that customer or whatever, but as a shareholder of the company and as a person who wants to maintain your reputation in your area, you want to have a list of happy customers, right? Mm-hmm. So aligning use cases right up front is one of the best ways to do that, in my opinion. Have you guys experienced that as well?
One more thing I wanted to add real quick before, commenting on that is don't overlook the importance of satisfying the use cases. As much as it personally kills me in my huge ego, I like to talk about all the cool stuff your product can do. Sometimes all the customer needs to hear is that it does those 1 or 2 use cases. As mundane and boring as they may be, do not overlook those. I'll tell you right now, everyone I've ever known that's been an SE or in technical sales gets so excited about to talk about the cool stuff that your product may do or whatever you're selling may do. Don't overlook the most basics with satisfying the primary use cases. Right?
Sometimes yes is an answer.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's the ultimate sales answer. Does your product do XYZ? Yes.
Yeah. No.
Well, and, in order to tell good stories, like we talked about in last week's episode, you need to understand these use cases, right? If you don't know what the use cases are, the stories aren't going to land.
Well, and understanding and being able to, discuss and agree and fulfill use cases is a big part of having a strong relationship with a client, which leads to that referenceable client, which leads to the relationship that'll get you put through the next renewal. It basically says, hey, I see you. I understand you. These are, this is the battlefield that we play on. I mean, it's, if you're kind of throwing those aside and just trying to bulldozer them with, hey, look at all the cool crap we can do, then that's how you're going to be second best. You're not going to make it.
I think weaving the two together to answer your question, Keith, since I detracted and I digress, is one, if you want to keep a happy customer, satisfy the use case first, but tell them, and then, you guys remember that movie with Ashton Kutcher and
then
the other dude? And then at the Chinese
then?
restaurant. And then?
Was that
And
was
then?
that dude? Where's my car?
Dude, where's my card? Oh,
And then?
and then? So that's what I like to do is I like to say, these are your use cases. And then I tell the customer, and then? Are you thinking ahead, Mr. or Mrs. Customer? Or, non-binary they customer. I want to satisfy your use cases, but that's not the end of the story. A great relationship that carries us into the future and recurring revenue is the and then, right? I will do this for you now, no doubt. That's easy. That's table stakes. We got that. And then, I like the and then.
And honestly, use cases are what separates the serious customers from the tire kickers too. If you can't get any use cases out of them, you're not going to win them over with a POC or a demo.
Yeah.
Like they don't have any pain, right? Where there's no pain, there's no sale.
Well, and you also have less of a competitive advantage over anybody else. If nobody's getting to a point where they're telling a story at that level, then you're just looking at, they're comparing dashboards and prices.
Yeah.
Race to zero, baby.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, you get into a commodity war at that point,
Right.
and
Yeah.
that's not where you want to be.
No,
Race
it's
to
a place
zero.
where you have an opportunity to kind of, project your intellectual capital.
Now, with you guys, because we've all worked the gambit of larger companies, medium companies, smaller companies. I've worked for. We've probably all at some point worked for incredibly large publicly traded companies. And then incredibly small startups, right? So we've had to play the role of customer success sometimes as well, being a sales engineer and passing on that to maintain that happy customer status of, yes, you've fulfilled their initial use cases, but now they're in love with your product and they have more, right? So how do we get those to the right people to get things done, to move sales, or the selling what's not yet on the truck, but still getting that delivered on time.
I actually enjoy that aspect of it. Number one, I don't like selling what's not on the truck, but when you have a
Right.
customer who's truly invested in a business partner, that's something I do not take lightly as a partner.
Right.
Or a quote from somebody. I won't mention them by name specifically, but never mind. I'm sorry. I completely spaced out on that. John, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
It's all right.
It's a long night.
It punched you in the brain where you were like, I gotta get this out. But no, business partners, sometimes in vendor land, in software vendor land, and I won't talk about like Ferrari, they're probably not going to take this sort of feedback, or Rolex, where they're based on something they do well. It's okay to have my customers help me dictate the direction of my product. Back to that storytelling where they're telling you a 45-minute story about a consultant and his dog, and you're like really zoned out and you can't drink enough whiskey, but you take away one tidbit where you're like, that might be a great idea to take our product to the next level. That's actually something that I find valuable. Now, it's not selling futures. It's a little different. You can maybe commit to it, but related in the same way, right? We're listening, we're actively engaged, and we're taking your use case into consideration and measuring it against other use cases and customers and saying, this is a go. That's powerful.
Well, it is. Well, it's something that, I've had a relatively new experience with where I'm at now. Because I'm in what you would call not necessarily the largest of, but a decent mid-sized managed security services company. And every now and then we get one of those requests. I'm like, I have no idea if we can do that or not. And I'll talk up to one of the big brains who's in charge of product or delivery for one of the the research arms. And they're like, oh yeah, okay, I got an idea how I do that. Like, can you put a price on that? It's like, sure. Like, well,
There you
awesome.
go.
The idea that I don't have to wait for months of R&D and development to be able to deliver a product, to see it on the truck, when it's something that's a matter of just a strategy that somebody who knows all the right stuff is able to say, well, what if I adjust this report and I think about it in that term there, and we're attacking this instead of that? Oh yeah, we could definitely do that. That is such a cool element to be able to have, and a flexibility that is new to me. And, because I'm so used to having that terror of the person asking for what's not on the truck. And you know what, damn it, if it's not on the truck by the time it needs to be delivered, hell to pay. And we've seen that plenty of times, because frequently And I think we've all worked for at least one company that had a tendency to do the hard things first. And they would wait on like the simple integrations that they could just simply acquire, and they never did. And years down the road, you'd be still challenged, in a sales environment where, but these things happen. So, yeah.
No, I hear you, Eric. So, like, to add on to that, to make it real, I want commoditized AV that does signature matching, as little value as that possibly provides.
Yeah,
that was the ask, and
you might have confused some of our listeners with that. Explain that a little bit more, John.
Yeah. So back in the day, the three of us used to sell endpoint security software, basically that sits on your laptop or workstation. Still not on mobile devices, although it should be. And basically, it looks for files that you download or that you've connected to, and it basically matches a signature of this file. Just call it a signature for lack of a better term. And it just basically says, is it bad or is it good? If it's bad, I will block it. It seems like a very simple thing. It was the way most antivirus was built in the beginning, and it's table stakes, but it is a compliance mandate. Back to that Eric's point before.
And damn it, John, I want to be able to be group managed based upon Active Directory.
Yeah, group managed by Active Directory, where I can distribute it to these three idiots who are out in the field, literally. So back to that point, though, that's the exact use case. Everything we were selling was in addition to that. It was so cool on top of that, but it didn't do that one fundamental thing that they needed. So we failed.
Yeah,
and some of
that would have to do with the fact that we would be out there in the field and we would be selling. That would be like a sliver of what we were selling. It was selling this whole set of features on top of that. But to be able for them to sacrifice what they had in place right now without that little feature would have resulted in a huge workload, which simply, most people are going to look at that and say, you know what, for all the cool stuff you're telling me that I can do, I'm not going to take on the extra workload of what I'm no longer going to be able to do.
100%. So back to the very root of it. Thank you for bringing that back, Keith. And Eric for doubling down. If you can't understand the use case and what's the compelling reason to buy, don't even waste the story, man.
Yeah.
Unless you just like talking. But then maybe this ain't the right job. Maybe you should host a podcast. No.
So I want to, but before we,
that was like a double-edged compliment.
Before we wrap this one up, I do want to, because we talked about it a little bit, when we alluded to it, but I do want to expressly say there are some dangers of selling stuff that isn't yet on the truck. We talked about how we try to avoid it. Sometimes you can't necessarily avoid it because it's not your call. It's almost never your call, to be honest. It's going to be the sales guy's call, and he's going to push with his manager, and they're going to work it the way up. You may have some technical input, but most of the time it's going to get pushed way above your head. The quote, I remembered it. The quote is, don't confuse selling with delivery. So, meaning you can sell it if it's not on the truck, but delivery, that's somebody else's job. You need to trust. You need to trust who it is that's doing that delivery to actually deliver, right? Because otherwise it's going to make you look bad.
Delivery.
Or you got to be the other kind of SE and simply not give a damn, which I won't be.
Yeah. Well, that's not going to serve you too much, right? Like word gets around. Yeah, it's incredibly short-sighted.
It's painful.
So let's go around the horn with final thoughts for this episode. My main point I want people to leave with is you can't tell a story which is essential without a use case, because without pain there is no sale. Eric, what do you got for us?
I love pain. It makes the best stories.
It do. John, what do you want our listeners leaving with?
Use cases are critical. They can both be your differentiator as well as your compelling event. And if you're really good, you know how to use all of it. So
you want to tie a bow on your Ferrari story too to have a nice ending to it before we end the podcast?
Yeah.
Or tell us why you had your hand up a chicken's butt.
Yeah. Elbow deep in a chicken. So to end up that story, I always use that analogy. Nobody's ever going to tell you that they don't want to check out your Ferrari and test drive it. No one will ever say that. Now, when it comes time to ask, are you going to buy this Ferrari? That's when you're going to figure out what's what. That was a beautiful bow there, Keith.
Yeah, I agree, John. Well done. Well done, sir. So, if you enjoyed today's episodes, please subscribe wherever you get your podcasts or on YouTube if you like watching us on video. You can also get all things Altar of the Demo Gods by going to demogodspod.com. Send in emails with your questions, show requests, things like that to demogodspod@gmail.com. Eric, John, been great having you on. And to those listening, we'll see you next week on Altar of the Demo Gods.